The Trumpet Daily is presented by Stephen Flurry. The program analyzes world news and history from a distinct perspective and compares current events to prophecies found in the Bible. The program also offers free educational publications, including the Trumpet News Magazine and books and booklets. The Trumpet Daily is produced at the Philadelphia Church of God's home campus in Edmond, Oklahoma, and its sister campus in Edstone, England. More information is available at thetrumpet.com.
The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Today's world news, what it means, where it's taking us.
I bring you the one and only possible message of world peace.
This is a message of hope, tremendous hope. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
It was absolutely amazing. I was just telling my husband I can't wait to see Celtic Throne 3. It was really amazing.
It was so much fun. So many different elements and so many people on stage from young to older, the level of talent, and everyone seemed to be having fun. So it's so contagious and you can't help but being drawn into it. So we loved it. It was tremendous music and beautiful dancing and wonderful choreography. Just cannot say enough good things about it.
It's a great show. We love the dance. So much energy, so much wonderful story.
Outstanding. It's great. That one guy is outstanding. He's so good. He does it all. That's great.
He wishes he could do all that too.
Yes.
This is my fourth time seeing Celtic Throne, and so we love it. Probably going to see it a fifth or sixth time too, honestly. So I'm super excited. Everything's been awesome.
10 out of 10, and no notes. Super fan. We'll come back every time.
Oh, yeah.
This is my first time, and I'm definitely going to be back. Once again, it would be a 10 out of 10 recommend.
First time, great show. The dancing, incredible. You guys are talented, amazing.
Oh, it's great, yeah.
I
really
like the storyline to go with the dancing and the singing. Yeah, it was a good storyline. Yeah, that's what I like.
That in the background you have back there.
Yeah.
Yeah, really nice. It really is. Yeah.
It was amazing, so professional and energetic and very inspiring.
Yes, the best show I've seen in a very long time. I just can't believe how amazing and precise and in unison they are.
It's very impressive. I really, really enjoy it. I wasn't expecting a play to go with it, but I can't rave enough.
It's a whole nother level. It was incredible.
Fantastic. I loved it.
It was one of those edge of your seat, tap my feet, slap my hands. It was fantastic. I did see Celtic Throne once, but this head and shoulders above it. Fantastic. Just the showmanship, the kids in particular. I love seeing the kids dance. It was fantastic. Great show. I'd see it again.
It was an awesome show. I loved the family and everything. It was just wonderful.
It was beautiful.
Beautiful. It was so good.
Thank you so much.
We loved it.
You can tell a good show by how they work real hard, and show a great show by how much it changes from the first time you see it to the last time. It was great.
It was wonderful. Everything about it was spectacular. The music, the singing, the dancing, the energy, it was wonderful. The wonderful story, the choreography was amazing. The dancers were amazing. Thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you. Yeah.
Tonight, you and your wife are going to be viewing Celtic Throne 2. Maybe you can tell our audience, we'll circle all the way back to what you touched on at the start. Your experience or history with Celtic Throne?
Well, I have to sort of hand it to you guys because when I first came here and I encountered your work in biblical archaeology, I was like, what are the odds that a bunch of guys in Oklahoma are like at the frontier of biblical archaeology in America, are actively involved in these digs, and are putting out really valuable information? I was like, gotta hand it to them. They're doing amazing stuff here by any way of looking at it. And then, almost like out of nowhere, you're like, come, let's watch this Celtic Throne. And I thought, okay, well, this is going to be, kind of quaint and amusing, and it's really nice to have a lot of people get up on stage and belt out a few songs. And I was just so startled at the brilliance of it and the quality of it, the music. And not only that, but it's one thing to take, 8 professionals and put them up on a stage. It's another thing to put 100 people on the stage, which includes entire families and kids, and somehow it all works. And you're kind of left a little speechless. So here you have excellence in 2 utterly unrelated areas, right? On the one hand, we're talking about the Tell dance Steli. On the other hand, you're talking about Irish dance. So it's just such a unlikely and startling area to. So I was just so struck by it, and I've been looking for a way to come see it again. And of course, Debbie hasn't seen it the first time. So we're very excited, and I'm actually thrilled that it's a new variation, and I know it's going to be great. And so we went to see Riverdance recently, by the way. And this was a whole generation after Debbie had seen the original one with Flatley. And while Riverdance is technically spectacular, the actual storyline and plot is a bit of a nothing burger, And so I think that I actually expect, and this is not just I hope, but based on experience, that this is going to be a more enjoyable performance. And that says a lot.
It does indeed. That's Dinesh D'Souza, of course, the best-selling author. He's written more than 20 books, I think it is, including this one, The Stones Cry Out. We'll talk more about this here in just a second. But he's also a filmmaker, and we were able to preview his film, or the 12 chapters that he's got coming out with PragerU online about biblical archaeology. But he's also a big fan of Celtic Throne. As you can see there, that was what he said right at the end of our, I think, 90-minute discussion yesterday. We're going to play 33 minutes of it for the second half of today's show. So there's a lot to get to, a little bit easier for me again, which is nice. But we put in a fair bit of work yesterday to have a great conversation. Brent Noctegal, our former Jerusalem correspondent, he still works for Let the Stones Speak, and a lot of our Jerusalem content does go through him still. So he joined us for the discussion yesterday, and like I say, we'll be playing the first third of that on today's show. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. We appreciate you joining us on this good Monday morning or evening or whatever it is when you happen to watch the Trumpet Daily. You can get to the show at our website, thetrumpet.com, or at the Rumble channel or the YouTube channel as well. Dinesh talks about this book, or the impact that our publications have had on his research and his understanding of biblical archaeology, including our magazine, Let the Stones Speak. He drew inspiration from that when he titled this book. He also drew inspiration from Luke 19, as he was telling us yesterday, when Jesus was coming into Jerusalem, sitting on the colt, and all of the disciples were just shouting and singing praises to God and rejoicing evermore. And this kind of was embarrassing to the Pharisees. And they said to Jesus, look, tell your disciples to quiet down. And Jesus said to them, he said, I tell you that
if these should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out. God can work through stones. God can speak through stones. When we see God's hand in the affairs of men, that should, as we've noted so many times on this program, it really should move us with inspiration. When you go through all the chapters in this book, and you see, okay, there's this reference to Pilate or Caiaphas, or there's this reference to King David or Jeremiah or Jeuchal, Gedaliah. All of these biblical personalities, and they're actually carved in stones. It just brings the Bible to life. And what other book besides the Bible comes under such a ferocious attack? And as Mr. D'Souza said yesterday, a lot of it comes from academia, from the scholars, from the smart people. They look at the Bible and they do everything that they can to discredit it. They don't attack the Quran that way. They don't go after other religious texts that way. But when it comes to the Bible, when it comes to God's inspired word, well, they attack that viciously. And you know why? Because there's a real spirit world. And Satan hates the Word of God. Satan hates the fact that all Scripture is given by inspiration from God. And so he does everything he can to discredit it. And here we have all of these advances in technology that, if anything, like Mr. Nachtigal said yesterday, if anything, the scholars should be boxed into a corner, because more and more is being revealed. The Tel Dan Stela, that came out in 1993, I think it is. So much about King David, his palace, that's happened in just the last 20 or 30 years. All of those bullae with those biblical personalities, the location of King David's palace. He wasn't some tribal chieftain. He headed up the kingdom of Israel. God anointed him. God's hand was involved. And when God is involved, that should make us sit up and take note. That should make us stop and think and ponder. What does this mean? 2 years ago today, a head tilt saved the life of Donald Trump. It's hard to believe it's been 2 years. Just a slight tilt of the head. God miraculously intervened. And you remember how many people said it was a miracle at that time? Here's a short montage we've put together on that event from 2 years ago in Butler, clip 2.
Take a look at that. So that arrow is the lowest amount of illegal immigration ever in recorded history into our country. And then the worst president in the history of our country took over. And look what happened to our country. Probably 20 million people. And you know, that's a little bit over, but take a look at what happened. Watch out.
You know, your actions after that mess, that assassination attempt, were inspiring. You know, you, instead of shying away from things, instead of ducking down, you were pumping your fist in the air and saying, fight, fight, fight. And I think that's, I mean, you know, the president of the United States represents America, and I think that is America. That is strength under fire, and so that's a big part of the reason why I was excited to endorse you as the President of the United States for having another term here.
It is a miracle President Trump wasn't killed.
It is a miracle that Donald Trump is alive.
I think it was a miracle that Donald Trump was not struck.
Donald Trump has survived by a miracle.
Nothing short of a miracle.
There was a miracle. There was a miracle that happened, a big miracle. And Mr. Trump knows it, and his followers know it, and people all around him know that there was a miracle there.
The bigger miracle was that I was looking in the exact direction of the shooter, and so it hit me at an angle that was far less destructive than any other angle. So that was the miracle. That was, for those people that don't believe in God, I think we got to all start thinking about that. You have to, I'm a believer. Now I'm more of a believer.
We need to start thinking about that. I don't think there's a lot of discussion surrounding that event from 2 years ago today. Not like there should be, anyway. It's the same with these archaeological discoveries. They should be front page news because you see God in the details. My father wrote an article following the miracle at Butler. Why is God protecting Donald Trump? Why is he protecting him? Why did he save his life? Stop and think. He said the factors that enabled Mr. Trump to still be alive today are too dramatic to dismiss as coincidence. He's alive because of an unscripted moment displaying a chart he had to turn to look at. He's alive because of a gust of wind shifted that bullet left about 1 inch. He's alive because he cocked his head at the perfect angle at the perfect moment. And then my father says, do you see God in these details? You could say the same thing about the bulle, Isaiah, Hezekiah, Gedaliah, King David's palace, Solomon's wall. Do you see God in the details? Do you see God's hand? Do you stop and ponder that if the Bible is accurate, if the Bible is God's word, well, then you have to start looking into what God says about the way we should live, what God says about morality, what God says about the commandments, what God says about blessings and cursings, what God says about cause and effect. My father says here, as the personal and legal attacks on Trump have intensified in recent months, this again, he's writing this back in 2024, and all of them have failed spectacularly, one after another, some commentators have been concerned that his frustrated and desperate enemies would eventually attempt to assassinate him. In fact, my father talked about that even before Butler. And they did. And they tried to assassinate him again. And they did it even recently at that press conference or correspondence dinner. You can see plainly God's providence in that failed assassination attempt at Butler. You need to see just as plainly his providence in the whole drama unfolding in America today. We had another article in July of 2024. This is before Donald Trump came back. We titled it, God Isn't Finished with Trump. He's not finished. We wrote that right after Butler. And before he miraculously was reelected against all the odds. Do you see God in the details? That's why the content in this book is really inspirational. And one thing that was just, I told Mr. D'Souza this yesterday, but one thing that's just so refreshing about his documentary, the film version of this book, is just the way he talks about the Holy Bible. He's not speaking about the Bible like a skeptic or a scoffer or someone that's just trying to discredit it. He's got more of a Berean attitude, like it says in Acts 17. He searches the scriptures. I mean, he did approach his study more, as he says, from a secular standpoint. But just like Dr. Eilat Mazar did, all the years that we worked with her, she'd have the Bible in one hand and, a shovel in the other hand, so to speak, as she went digging through ancient Jerusalem. We've got to stick to the script. We've got to see God in the details. And we've got to see why God miraculously intervenes. And just looking at the other side of all these assassination attempts, what does that say about the world we're living in? Richard Palmer wrote this morning about this gal, Anne Widdecombe. She was 78 years old. She dies in the UK. People thought it was of natural causes. It turns out she was murdered. And as Mr. Palmer brings out in the morning brief, she was in many ways more influential than Charlie Kirk. You remember Charlie Kirk? That's not even been a year. He was murdered because the hatred, the attempt to just blot someone out, that spirit is everywhere in the world today. You can see why. We need hope. We need to put our hope in God's word. You can see why we need Celtic throne. You can see why we need excavations in Jerusalem, as we have going on. Even at this moment, we've got people leaving today for Jerusalem. More excavating, more godly, wholesome, uplifting activities. Today is the day that SEP starts here on campus, the youth camp that goes on for the next 3 weeks. What a blessing it is for these young people to come to this campus and to experience so many details with respect to God's way of life. Do we see God in the details? Last night during the intermission of Celtic Throne, Dinesh D'Souza and his wife Debbie, they went backstage and gave a little pep talk to the performers. And we'll play that for you now before we head into our exclusive interview with Dinesh D'Souza on his forthcoming book. This is an advanced copy, but this comes out in October, as does his film on the same subject. So you can enjoy the discussion that we have with him on that. But before that, the backstage discussion during the Celtic Throne performance, the final performance of this season, by the way. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. Thanks for joining us.
Enjoying it so much.
Wow.
We're enjoying it so much. Are you having fun?
Yes. Amazing. Wow.
Well, you're probably going to miss it after you're done, right?
Yeah.
What? But you've had an incredible schedule, right? Have you done, what, how many performances?
15 shows this summer.
Woo. Now you're looking forward to sleeping late. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it was amazing. I can't wait to see the second half. Just absolutely unbelievable.
Well, it's so incredible to have so many little guys on stage and beautifully coordinated. You don't miss a step. Are you having fun? Oh.
So how old is the youngest?
These guys, they didn't come on tour with us, but they dance in the...
I was about to ask you that.
Yeah, the youngest one on tour was 9.
Okay.
That's Ray.
Not me.
No, it's not you. Yeah, it's one of the elements that makes it unique. Like no other shows have children.
Yeah,
Right.
no.
Yeah.
Well, that's when they start, right?
Yeah.
The music is gorgeous. I mean, it
Yeah,
just
beautiful.
captivates you and draws you into it.
If you hadn't told me that it wasn't a professional dance troupe, I would have thought otherwise.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah, we just saw Riverdance, about 2 weeks ago? They have nothing on it. Seriously. In fact, Dinesh even said, he's like, just wait till you see Celtic Throne. They're going to blow these people away.
Well, I just think the harmony of so many people on stage doing so many different things at the same time, with the music and the sets, and it like never lets up, it's just more enjoyable.
Yeah, there's a lot more energy.
A lot more energy.
Yeah.
And just wonderful to see you little guys coming up and doing so well. I mean, you guys are just incredible.
Yeah, the
Wow.
technique. I mean, it's amazing. Wow. Well, congrats, guys. It's
We're
amazing.
excited about part 2.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we can catch up after the show too.
Yes. Yes.
All right. See you next.
Dinesh D'Souza, welcome back to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We have Brent Noctegal joining us today for the discussion, and a lot to talk about, including your most recent project. We'll get to that in a second. Hopefully we can get some commentary on just news events as well. And then, as I mentioned to you earlier, some comments on Celtic Throne 2, which you're going to be seeing later today. So a lot to get to.
Yeah, I think the last time I was here, I saw Celtic Throne 1.
Right.
And I thought I was going to be seeing the same, but I learned it's going to be a kind of improvised or revised version. And of course, Debbie hasn't seen, my wife hasn't seen either one. So we're excited.
Awesome. So The Stones Cry Out. Tell us about your most recent project.
Well, it's a project that got started at the end of 2022 because I went, my wife and I went to Israel for the first time. And my first feeling about it was being in the land of the Bible. You know, we live at a time when if you go to cities these days, they all have become kind of homogenized. They've lost that sense of distinctiveness, but not Jerusalem. And so that was charming enough, but discovering biblical archaeology, which is a subject I didn't know a lot about, even though I've written 3 books on Christian apologetics, I was quite amazed at the artifacts coming out of the ground, not just the big stuff, but sometimes the very little stuff. As you know, Brent, it's a tiny seal that has a name on it that refers to some, guy who makes a cameo appearance in the Bible. That is just as mind-blowing as finding the palace of King David. So I recognize the significance of it, and I thought to myself, wow, we don't hear about this. This should be shouted from the rooftops of churches and synagogues.
Right.
So that's a very odd omission.
Yeah.
Pastor is preaching on Jeremiah and doesn't, put up on the screen a seal that tells you a lot about the historicity of Jeremiah. Why not? We live in a secular age where young people go to the university, they learn the language of history and science, they learn to respect that mode of argument. So I thought to myself, there's something really big here that kind of the world needs to know more about. And the fact that I don't know much about it tells me that even educated people are in the dark.
Right.
I subsequently learned that there is also a reason on the archaeological side for this kind of bashfulness. And it's partly that archaeologists in general want to be secular. They want to have an independent discipline. They don't want to be seen as somehow contaminated by Revelation or the Bible. And so the pastors who don't know about it are silent. The archaeologists are somewhat on the down low, as they say. And as a result, the information doesn't get out. So I kind of hatched the idea. And then, as you know, you guys invited me to come speak when you had the Tell Dan Stelly here. I learned more about the Armstrong Institute. I became a regular, not just consumer, but kind of devourer of the Let the Stone Speak, which is cited in the book. And I've learned a lot from that magazine, and from every issue has sometimes 1, but sometimes 2 or 3, just to me, highly educational and indispensable articles. At least they have been for me. So all of this was the backdrop against which I conceived this project.
Right. Yeah, you're very nice about citing us, and you showed us before we started the interview. But the book itself comes out in October along with the documentary. So this is sort of the advance copy, I guess.
Well, I went to PragerU, and their political organization, and I thought to myself, I wonder if they're going to be a little bit reluctant to embrace this kind of a project because of its kind of theological and biblical. But PragerU is all about defending Western civilization. And so I told him, look, it is important to affirm the historicity of the Bible. I'm not discussing the miracles or the theology of it, but we're discussing, is the Bible about real people and true events? And Western civilization is based on Athens and Jerusalem. Now, you don't need to defend Athens because Athens is philosophy, it's the theater, it's the beginning of democracy. Jerusalem is the kind of vulnerable pillar of the West. And so most of the skepticism, the attacks on the West have been on the Jerusalem pillar of Athens and Jerusalem. So I said, look, this is a project, a documentary that also breaks up, by the way, into separate episodes. So for me, it's very exciting because I have tried in the past to read the Bible like straight through. It's not easy to do, by the way. And so I end up giving up like along the way. And then, just reading it in snapshots, so to speak. But what I did as I was working on this project, this study, was I've created a kind of, I won't say alternative Bible, but you can say a tapestry running on top of the Bible, in which the entire sweep of biblical history from the patriarchs to the Acts of the Apostles, I can now drop in the relevant dates and then also drop in the relevant artifacts. So the whole thing takes on this kind of new dimension, which only enriches your appreciation of and knowledge of Scripture.
Yeah. It's interesting what you say about archaeology and theologians. One statement from your preface: biblical archaeology is a discipline that is somewhat ashamed of itself. What did you mean by that?
I've come across in the course of this book these archaeological studies, and they will be discussing something of unquestioned biblical significance. And it could even be something as spectacular as the Sisters of Nazareth doing archaeological digging to build a convent, to lay the foundations, and stumbling upon a cistern that leads to an old church, that leads to an even older construction. And this may be like the childhood home of Jesus, right? But if you read the archaeological report, there's no mention of this. It's talked about it. There's a very interesting old home that has been excavated in Nazareth. No mention of the biblical significance. It's almost as if the archaeologist is embarrassed about the very thing that makes this study a headline around the world, different from any ordinary archaeological dig, but that's the fact that is downplayed. That's what I mean when I say ashamed of itself. It's like they don't want to make the biblical connection even when it's unavoidable.
Yeah. We spent, Brent would know this well, we had a wonderful working relationship with the late Eilat Mazar, and she used the Bible. That's what kind of drew us to her. She would use it for the history and the dates and, little nuances here and there when she would then go and dig. But yeah, she would have told you straight up, I am not religious in any way. She wasn't into Judaism. And the few times, like when she would say about, let's say, David's palace, and then I would talk a little bit about David and, what he did and Bathsheba, and she would always kind of like want to change the subject after that, get back into just what does the Bible say about where this palace is, and that he went down to the fortress or something like that. But we still cherished our time with her, and she was so kind to us, and in a lot of ways she behaved in a very religious way, in the way that she cared for people. So, but yeah, it's interesting that you do kind of make that distinction between these two camps, where it seems like there should be more of a meeting of the minds.
It's a little bit puzzling as to why someone would take the approach she did, right? Because she's a Jew, right? This is Jewish history. If you remove the Bible, think of how that undercuts the story of the Jews in their ancestral homeland. And not only that, but just applying a common sense lens. If there's a tapestry of a narrative and you can verify key parts of it, it increases the credibility of the whole. Right? If you have a guy who's accused of murder, right? And he says, I was doing this on that day and I was over here. I really wasn't even in town. I went to see a movie. Well, all right, let's say you can't verify his entire story, but he has the movie ticket and he has the place where he filled gas. and he happens to have the kind of car that was spotted on the highway, well, his story is probably true as a whole, because you're able to verify these key episodes. And so even though I quite clearly say, look, I'm not going to be discussing, there are many things that the Bible talks about that cannot be or have not been verified archaeologically, but enough of them have that the believability of the whole is thereby strengthened.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, maybe you could summarize just some of the things that we've tried to publicize and spotlight over the course of our time in Jerusalem.
We've found the same, we've run into the same issue when we go through scientific reports from archaeological digs. And it's like you have to do a dig into that scientific report to make the biblical connection there, because they are coy about so upfront connecting what they've discovered to the biblical narrative. And that might be for a number of reasons. You know, I've had scholars talk to me and say, we would like to have included this, but then the journal in Europe or somewhere is not going to accept the study in their peer review paper. And so there's multiple things at play that are working against, I think, an archaeologist coming out and saying what I've found really does match well with the biblical text. However, I think they are increasingly recognizing, I think, especially over the past 5 years, that the connection to the Bible is what people are interested in. And so if they are going to be able to continue excavation, get funding, get a wider appeal to what they've discovered or wider knowledge to what they've discovered, then they're running into this kind of roadblock or this war against themselves to how much they're going to bring the biblical narrative in. And we've basically taken what we've done in Jerusalem with Dr. Eilat Mazar and continuing, we have a dig going on right now in Jerusalem, and then other people's excavations and scientific reports. And we match the place of the event with the time period in the Bible and the archaeological dating of that time period, and done what you've done in a more broken up way, I suppose, more individual segments of history, showing people how that event, the Bible's narrative about that event fits perfectly with the archaeology, and they go together hand in glove. So we have our magazine, Let the Stone Speak, that you've referred to many times. We wanted to put archaeology and the Bible into the public sphere more than what it was happening. And so when your book came along and you approached us about, we're working together, you know, in some ways working together in this broader picture of bringing the Bible to life, we were really excited to see.
I mean,
a bigger audience.
You helped me get it done, and I have found your work indispensable for that exact reason. See, here's the thing: when we look at, just in the big picture, you look at Christianity and look at, say, Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Islam has one big thing going for it, which is that it has not lost the force of its original revelation. It is amazing to see Muslims around the world who, in a sense, are right out of the 7th century.
Right.
And the divides that you see in Christendom, in other words, by and large, you find that more educated people tend to be more secular, for example. You don't find that in Islam. You find a Muslim PhD and a Muslim, street worker, they're equally religious. So that's going to be an asset viewed as just in a kind of neutral way that Islam has going for it, right? Well, what does Christianity have going for it? What does Judaism have going for it? Well, one thing that often gets ignored is the claim to historical truth. In other words, this is based on stuff that actually happened. Mm-hmm. Think about it. This kind of archaeology we talk about cannot even be attempted with the Hindu scriptures or the Buddhist scriptures or even the Quran. No one even bothers to try. No one says, all right, let's go try to figure out where Muhammad was when he took this journey into heaven. Was he actually in Jerusalem? No one even makes the effort, because those texts are not given even the atheist or the skeptic wants to refute the Bible. Mm-hmm. They don't bother to refute the Quran. The Bible is the standard. And that's, I think, what makes this kind of work so important, is that it has the power to take any reasonable person in the world and say, whatever you think about this, this is in fact an artifact, and this civilization was here, and we can tell you when it was here, and we can tell you who was involved. And so this stuff is as real as it gets.
Yeah.
You said that you went to Jerusalem for the first time in 2022.
Yeah, December of 22.
And you touched on previously already the impact that that had on you, and you write about that in the book. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what the impact was when you first visited Israel. You said 5 of those days you were in Jerusalem, and then how that sort of led to your interest in archaeology.
We were invited by Salem Media to go on one of these trips that takes 300 people with a couple of speakers. And so Sebastian Gorka, who's now a senior official in the Trump administration, and I were the 2 speakers. And then they have local guides who take you to specific places while you're there. And so part of it was, it started out our trip in the northern part of Israel. And so we had this beautiful set up on the Sea of Galilee, Lake of Galilee, we now know. And so Gorka and I were giving a talk on large fishing boats kind of hitched to each other. And I just felt this kind of eerie sense of wonder about being, right there on the place where Jesus was. And so then going on to places like, Magdala, Mary Magdalene, Capernaum, where there's the remnants of the, there's quite a bit of the old synagogue, where according to the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus taught in that synagogue. And then we kind of went to Caesarea by the sea, and then down to Jerusalem. So the whole thing was, I think, left a very powerful impression. And we were, in fact, we were in our small bus with a Canadian couple from Montreal, sort of very sophisticated, I would call them lapsed Catholic Canadians, very nice and conservative politically. But I think they thought this whole thing was just like a tourism experience. And but you could see the shock and astonishment on their face as they saw things where they realized, this is the stone tablet, and it has the name of Pontius Pilate on it, and here's the ossuary, and it has the name of Joseph Caiaphas, and these biblical figures like jumping out of the Bible into the pages of history and archaeology. For Debbie and me, it was more a matter of faith being reaffirmed. But I think for them, it was a matter of like, wow, the stuff that we had sort of dismissed as being quasi-mythological actually has very firm grounding. So I think that was also interesting to observe with our friends we were seeing it through their eyes a little bit.
Right.
And so it was the beginning. I've been to Israel, I think, 4 times since then, so I feel much more, at home there now. I was there earlier this year for a conference on anti-Semitism that the government put on, and we were planning to go again, but of course, because of the skirmishes, the war, the ongoing kind of troubles, the airport being closed. So I then just decided, all right, this is something I really need to learn about, and then my experiences here, just marveled at how you had built up so much trust with the Hebrew University, with the Israeli Antiquities Authority, that they would take priceless artifacts and entrust them to your care. And then you invited me kindly to speak when you had the Tel Dan Stele here. So all of that had a very formative impact on me in devising and then executing this project.
Yeah, in case people don't know, that was we had an exhibit here for about 8 months that focused on the time period of David and Solomon that you came and spoke at, introducing the Tel Dan Stele, which mentions the House of David, reference to the biblical King David that you go through in this book as well. And so we were just really happy to have you here, and seeing how, I remember that day that you gave the speech. I think even our founder, Mr. Gerald Flurry, was going to speak, but he couldn't at the last minute. And then you gave your speech and you talked about how archaeology was looking like it was being used for this moment right now in particular. The stones are speaking. If the naysayers are going to say the biblical text is a fabrication of history, here we have this other tool that has only come into light in the past 100 years, but even increasingly so in the past decade, I would say. Here it's available to be used for this purpose as well.
Yeah, as I learned more about the history of biblical archaeology, it looks like, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that it has gone in three waves. The early wave was, let's loosely say, 1850 to 1948. The second wave was after the formation of the State of Israel, 1948 to 2000, and then 2000 to now. So that's the 21st century wave. And it seems like with each wave, there's like an intensification of these mind-blowing discoveries that are coming faster and faster. And so it forced me to think about, well, why now? I mean, there's been, think of it, the ossuary of Caiaphas with his bones was sitting there for 2,000 years. It could have been found at any time. It's been found within our lifetimes. So what is the larger meaning, if any, of that? And one possibility is simply to say, look, as the world has become more secular, moved away from God, it's almost like God, who had spoken in the thunderous language of Revelation, in the beginning, and God created the heavens and the earth, the biblical sort of declaration tone, where the Bible in general doesn't argue things, it doesn't offer evidence, it doesn't prove things, it asserts them. This is the way it is. And it's almost like God is like, all right, I'm going to now become a little bilingual here. And in the latter days of the world, I'm going to start churning up out of my creation, out of nature itself, the telltale signs or artifacts that are going to speak in the language of secularism, if we can call it that, language of science, language of history. And so that to me is at least is one way of looking at why it's happening in our time.
The technology too makes it.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's things that Dr. Mazar started doing halfway through our time with her where all of a sudden everything that was dug up, even though there's more and more layers and the world's more and more chaotic and more secular, as you say, the technology really works against the scoffers because it's just revealing so much more detail from our past.
In the 19th century, I think the skeptics thought that they would be able to use history and archaeology against the Bible. I'm thinking here of when George Smith discovered the Mesopotamian creation stories. And people didn't know about those. So when you suddenly realize that there are these flood narratives and creation stories from other parts of the world, a skeptic could say, well, there you go. The writers of the Bible simply plagiarized from the Babylonians. They just took this from here and that from there, and it's kind of all made up. And so you could almost say, okay, well, round one to the skeptics, or at least so it seemed. But it hasn't gone so well for them since then. And I think that's been the big story of biblical archaeology. One of the things that I stress in the book is the fact that as far as I know, there is no significant archaeological finding. There are arguments about dates. There are arguments about locations. Is the Via Dolorosa over here or over there? But can you name a single significant archaeological find that refutes the Bible? Well, if the answer is no, think of what that means. Because there are hundreds, probably thousands of artifacts in total. And if to date, even if you haven't found stuff, well, the absence of evidence isn't really evidence of absence. But if there's nothing that undercuts the Bible, I think that's a strong reason to affirm the credibility of the Bible.
Yeah, it is interesting, as you mentioned, the increase in scientific technology kind of boxes in the scholars, because as more methods, particularly in archaeology, are developed that can more precisely date sites, date discoveries, then you can fit it more precisely in a chronological window. But the Bible gives its dates for things as well. And so it's getting harder and harder to take a discovery and say it doesn't support the biblical narrative. That's one example of different methods of dating. And then you have only in the past 20 years have people started to wet sift material. Just this technology. It's so basic. You would think they would be doing it for hundreds of years, but they weren't. Where you put through a big sieve and then spray down all the remnants of the little rocks and things to help show you what is a piece of dirt or a rock and what is a little seal impression or a ring or something like that. These things would have been lost in the large-scale excavations in the early 20th century. Nowadays, in the past 20 years, we have this explosion of small artifacts that have been found because of the development of this simple technology, and that's where you have all the names of people, biblical personalities coming out of as well.
Yeah, some of my favorite characters in the book are not even necessarily the biggest names in the Bible, right? Because when we think of archaeology, at least my ideas of archaeology came out of the Indiana Jones movies, but also like the novels of Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie's husband was evidently an archaeologist, or at least an archaeologist's assistant, and was on some of the famous digs in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, and so on. And so she has these spectacular backdrops for her detective stories, like Death on the Nile and so on, where, you have the pyramids and these giant mammoth structures. But what I found really very telling is you have a figure, the Israelites are crossing over into the Promised Land, and they have to go through Moabite territory. And there's this sort of soothsayer, Balaam, son of Beor, and the king of Moab says, you better curse the Israelites, make sure they have a bad time as they're trying to pass through. So there's a little biblical episode. It almost, when you read it, it's like a fairy tale, because Balaam is a donkey. He talks to the donkey in the Bible. So you can see how an ordinary skeptical reader will be like, well, it's ridiculous. There's no possible way this could even be true. And then, a piece of plaster falls off a roof, and they look at, and they're in the same area, by the way, Jordan, and they find something that says something like the curses of Balaam, son of Beor. I mean, it's the same place, it's the same name, it's the same guy, dad is the same. It's obviously the same guy. This kind of stuff I find very... it does make the hair stand up, a little bit, because you can't believe it. Yeah. And yet there it is, undeniable in the record.
I was telling the guys, one thing I really enjoyed about your documentary is just the way you're narrating it all throughout, but just the way you were talking about the Bible. There's a lot of people that have their various opinions or interpretations of Scripture. But you just spoke about the Bible from such a positive mindset. Like, this corroborates what, has been discovered here, and this is what it says in the scriptural account. So, but yeah, just knowing you as a conservative author all these years, or not knowing you, but the last few years, but knowing your work, to see you do that, it seems like you would be taking a little bit of a risk with maybe alienating some of your followers or audience, because, as you say, the world is just going more and more secular. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the reception you've already gotten for this project, because you've been working on it for 3 years, and if it has maybe turned off a few of your more avid followers.
I would look at it this way. I bring to this whole conversation a genuine faith, but my mind is secular. And I found over the years this to be a great asset in Christian apologetics, because the way I even got into debates with some of the leading atheists, this is now 10 to 15 years ago, is I saw Christopher Hitchens debating a pastor. And I realized that they were two ships passing in the night. The pastor kept citing the Bible, Hitchens kept mocking the authority of the Bible, and you're at a complete deadlock. And so that's when I sent Hitchens a note and said, hey, why don't we have a debate? Because we're going to be talking the same language. We're going to be debating in the language of history and philosophy and science. We're going to be talking in the language of the university. At no point in the debate will I appeal to the authority of Scripture. Scripture is not my starting point. It's my end point. So I'll be mounting a defense or vindication, but I'm going to do it in the language of the university. And that's my strength. And so that's the same tools I bring to this project. Is the way I look at it is, here is an exciting field that is like a public secret. No one knows about it. Very few people know about it, including people who are supposed to be the ones who are telling us about what the Bible, we learn about the Bible. And if we're not getting it in the seminaries or the university, and we're not getting it in the churches, well, there needs to be some way to blast this out into sort of the larger culture. And that's what I'm trying to do. So I see myself as standing in between the archaeological community that's doing the biblical archaeology over here, and a kind of curious but ignorant general public. I'm trying to bridge that gap.
Yeah. And do you feel like that you've found a way to do that effectively? You told me before that you were really actively working at the promotion side of things now, since the book comes out in October. But yeah, what going back to the audience, do you think there's going to be a lot of new people or new fans of Dinesh D'Souza as a result of this project? Or do you think it's going to be mostly your faithful followers that kind of support the video and the book as it comes out?
Well, I would count about 8 to 10 million followers I would have across the different social media platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Only a very tiny fraction of those people would know anything about the subject. And yet I think the vast majority of them would be intrigued by it. Even the ones that are not particularly religious, they nevertheless recognize our civilization is under siege. There are lots of people who want, down with the West. There is intense opposition to the nation of Israel. So as with PragerU, the interest in it may be less even biblical than it is historical or political or cultural or in a general sense moral. And my point is, welcome. In other words, I'm not a pastor. I'm trying to reach a quite diverse audience that may be coming to this topic for its own reasons, but they'll get a lot out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like Christians to develop a stronger respect for the archaeology of the Old Testament, which is sometimes kind of downplayed or even sidelined. And as you know, there's a political movement reminiscent of ancient heresies that kind of wants to kick the Old Testament out of the Bible. This book makes it impossible to do that.
Yeah.
And so themes like Christian Zionism and so on are imported into the study, but they're imported into the study because they belong there. You'll hear people say today, some people will say something like, well, the term Judeo-Christian is a meaningless term. Well, the early followers of Jesus were Jews. So they were Jews who were following the Messiah. I guess you could come up with terms other than Judeo-Christian for them, but that seems about as good a term as any, not to mention the fact that you find the remnants of early houses of worship in Israel, used by the early Christians, and you can kind of tell by little signs like the house of worship is not aimed at the temple, it's pointing to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So there are all these little indications that these were in fact early followers of Jesus, but in Jerusalem in the years following Christ's death.